Very lovely introduction. And the sad part about receiving the Taylor Award was that it received the notice from Ottawa 2 days after my husband passed away. So I had the honor of receiving both of our awards later on, but I really wish he had been there to know that he had been honored this way. Now, M2 had its actual beginnings in BC, in our home, when a very attractive young man came from Seattle to meet with three ministers, a Mennonite, a Pentecostal, and a Presbyterian. The Presbyterian man was Cal Chambers, my husband, who later became the first chair of the first board of M2. And there, I sat at the table with one of those original members today. It was lovely to be with him, Tony. Cal passed away over 2 years ago. So since he cannot be here tonight to speak to you on this very special occasion, I would like to quote what he wrote for the book that was published 10 years ago to celebrate the 40th anniversary of M2. Excuse me. I can never forget the impact made upon me when Dick Simmons, the founder of M2W2, came to visit a few ministers in the city of New Westminster in the spring of 1966. He shared with us how he and his wife had made their way from New York to Seattle with $11 in their pockets. They had somehow learned of a young man in one of the local prisons who was reaching out for someone to come to visit him. He had been rejected by his parents, who wanted nothing more to do with him, and in his loneliness and desire, had reached out for help. Dick and his wife Marilyn began to visit him, and under the impact of their love and concern, his life was totally changed. Thus began the unique ministry by this time, that had spread by this time to about 11 of the states, United States. Dick came up to Canada to see if he could find any ministers who would be willing to spearhead this visitation program into our area. Sometime later, after several more visits from Dick, the first M2 office was set up in the corner of our church, First Presbyterian Church. The first secretaries were Ray Coles and Mel Cox. Mel Cox was a new Christian and a recovering alcoholic, and he had spent his first sober New Year's Eve in many years in our living room, several years before this. By this time, the first volunteers who were from various congregations were already visiting in the prisons in the Lower Mainland. I went along with Cal, and the first prisons I visited in were Ocala and Haney Correctional Institute for Young Offenders. John, our first M2, was in Haney. I will never forget the sudden feeling of claustrophobia I experienced the first time I heard all those heavy doors clunking loudly behind me, and I knew I was going to get out. In the early 70s, Mel Cox encouraged Dorothy Halliday and Lee Ashley, also members of our congregation, to start visiting in the women's prisons. They eventually, in 1974, funding came through to be able to start the W2 program under Dorothy's leadership. Throughout the years, until his death, Cal and I have been involved in M2 together, and we have been so grateful to have lived long enough to witness how the Lord has blessed the M2W2 ministry over the years, and rejoice in the hundreds of lives that have been changed through the love of God that has been shown to them, all these men and women who are so lost and needy and lonely. Although after 49 years I am no longer a sponsor, I still keep in touch with our last M2s. One has been on parole now for going on for 3 years, and he's doing very well. And I'm so proud of him, and I was able to attend his wedding last summer. I will now close with a little story about John, our first M2. He and his buddy used to attend a discussion group that was open to anyone who was interested and led by several M2 volunteer men. And I believe Tony must have been one of them, because he used to visit in Haney also. One evening, the topic under discussion was the meaning of love. Of course, most of them thought that was sex. Eventually, John and his friend were released, and they showed up one morning at our back door. I was all alone, but I invited them in for a cup of coffee. In the course of our visit, I mentioned to the boys that a needy alcoholic man was staying with us at that time for a while. John looked at me and said, "Isn't that taking a risk?" Well, considering the situation, that was a rather ironic question to ask me, a woman alone with two men just out of prison. My reply was, "Yes, but isn't that what unconditional love is all about?" They turned to each other and said, "That's the kind of love they were talking about in prison and we don't know anything about." That is the kind of love that M2W2 is all about. One of my favorite choruses has words that express this so well. "Oh, to be his hand extended, reaching out to the oppressed. Let me touch him, let me touch Jesus, so that others will know and be blessed." We each need to receive that unconditional love ourselves to be able to pass it on to those who need it so badly. And hopefully one day, they in turn will be able to pass it on to someone else in need. Thank you very much.